Hi, everybody. Let's take another breath together and stretch out, open your energies and your system. So, okay. So my topic today is relationship. Um, it's a big one. We all are in relationship of some forms, or perhaps wanting other kinds of relationships or different kinds of relationship. I had a teacher that once said all of life is relationship. Um, and in my transformational coaching work, I teach something I call conscious responsible relationship, or sacred or evolutionary relationship. So again, we're probably just going to be able to scratch the surface here this morning, but I just want to offer you teachings that I've learned over the years from many wonderful teachers, Vern Black, Matt Garrigan, Scott Katamas, who founded the Love Coach Academy, another love coach, a man named Paul Sterling, who worked with Tony Robbins, a lot of really wonderful teachers. And somebody once used the analogy, there's a couple of interesting analogies about relationship. Along the lines of dating relationship, a coach once said, because, a lot of times when we're dating, we go out for food or drink, maybe not as much now during COVID, but, and people would, it was interesting. So the coach would say once, be careful of your alcohol consumption, because, you want to be careful about your alcohol consumption when you drive a car, but are you careful about your alcohol consumption when you drive your relationship? And so it's an interesting analogy to really continue to invite us to, stay conscious. And I'm not saying not enjoy ourselves with a cocktail here or there, if that's something that you like to do, but to stay more conscious about our presence in relationship, because presence is certainly one of the very important tools to bring ourselves together with others, to relate and connect. There was also an analogy because one of the things that I have learned is that, having a functional, conscious, workable, healthy relationship requires education. It also requires skills. I know I certainly was never taught any of this. I think growing up, I learned what I call the Disney formula for relationship, which is, find the fairy princess or the prince charming or whatever, and what I call add water and stir, and you're going to live happily ever after. I mean, isn't that the way it's supposed to work? And what I've learned is, no, that isn't the way it works. Now, I'm not saying that we can't have deep and soulful and what feels like very magical connections with people, but to maintain, a relationship over time. And I know there are people on this call who have done that, who have maintained successful relationships over time, either with a primary significant other in marriage or otherwise, or family relationships or friendships. But it's tricky. Even people who stay together for a lifetime, will have their upsets. And, upsets, conflicts, and confrontations are part of what happens. It's just part of the territory. But it's the people who have learned to resolve the conflicts, the confrontations, and upsets that seem to have long-lasting, satisfying relationships. Because a lot of times we think, oh, you just find the right person, you're never going to fight, you're never going to have differences, you're never going to have upsets. And it's really, as we all know, it's just not the case. So again, finding people that we're compatible with. I found, for some of you may know, I was gratefully in relationship with my partner, Jackie, for 13 and a half years. Unfortunately, Jackie passed away about 11 years ago, but the 13 and a half years we had mostly were really, really wonderful. Fortunately, I knew, because I was very involved in spiritual community back then as well, I knew that I was going to have to meet a partner, and I had met, more than one partner through spiritual community, because I was so devoted and so involved that I definitely needed somebody who was going to be involved as well, so that we could share that together and have it, not have a conflict between my spiritual life and my spiritual community, and someone that I also wanted to spend significant time with. So, but I learned, and one of the things I learned in relationship with Jackie was that there's a whole long list that I don't have with me today or will provide, but a whole long list of, I started creating a list of what I call compatibilities, because a lot of times we first start thinking that, of course we're taught that usually one of our primary compatibilities is attraction because of, usually we certainly want, sexuality and sensuality and intimacy, that kind of intimacy, with somebody, and attraction and chemistry is important. But it's certainly not the only thing. There's lots of powerful relationship teachers out there. Another woman, I can't think of her name right now, but who did, talked about, you don't actually want to be in a relationship with a 10, what's called a 10, the person that you're, the most attracted to, that you have the highest amount of chemistry with, because typically that kind of energy doesn't last. It's more compatible to be in a relationship with someone that chemistry wise is more of a 7 or an 8, something like that. Because, her name is Alison Armstrong. She's done a lot of powerful work about relationships. Some of you may have heard of her. So certainly, like I said, the sensual and sexual chemistry part of it is important if that's part of what you want in your relationship. Certainly, as someone who's becoming in older years now, my personal experience is the hormones wane and it's not as important. I certainly am still interested in sensuality and closeness and pleasure, but it's different. I don't have the drive that I used to have, so it's not as much of a need. But again, I recognized in relationship with Jackie that I had needs around compatibilities that I didn't even realize I had. Fortunately, in my relationship with Jackie, part of who I am is I'm also a very intellectual person. I like to use my mind. I'm very interested in language and the use of words. And when Jackie and I were able to converse in a way that I felt like she met me, she got me, she understood me. We certainly had a very strong spiritual connection. There are people sometimes we can consider having what we call an eternal relationship with, and these may not actually be lovers, because these could be friends, spiritual teachers, people in spiritual community, people that you just really connect with really well. And again, maybe you're never, lovers or that kind of thing, but what's called an eternal relationship. And again, for those of us that are spiritualists, even if people are in, on the other side of the veil now, it's really wonderful to still have what's called an eternal relationship, because it really surpasses this lifetime. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. But again, when I got together with Jackie, I had the experience with her that we had intellectual compatibility. And I had never even realized there was anything called intellectual compatibility. So that was really a wonderful thing. But coming back to the nature of relationship, again, one of the other analogies that I heard a teacher use was, I think this was Scott Katamas of the Love Coach Academy, or maybe it was Paul Sterling, I don't remember, or he learned it from Scott perhaps, that, it requires education and skills to maintain, to build and maintain what we call a healthy, functional, conscious, responsible, or what I call a sacred or evolutionary relationship. He said it's like having a pilot. When you have a pilot flying the plane that you're in, do you want that pilot to have luck or skill? So clearly we want that pilot to have skill. So certainly, while there will be a lot of magical and spiritual and mystical energies in a profound, very heart-filled soul relationship, we need to have skills. And a lot of what I teach in the Evo Academy, the company that I have, and in my transformational work is, those skills start with something that's becoming more and more popular these days, which is what we call emotional intelligence. I'm sure many of you have heard that. And my take and my approach to emotional intelligence is that, emotional intelligence is being able to have access to our feelings. And for many of us, and many of us are still healing from trauma and wounding in childhood, or perhaps even in times in adulthood. But so it's not, we're not always able to access our feelings perhaps, or as deeply as we'd like, or be able to express them, but we can certainly just keep practicing. So emotional intelligence for me is being able to feel my feelings, being able to identify my feelings. And I had to learn all this. I grew up in a family that did not really communicate. It was about the good stuff, getting the A's in school and winning the games in sports. But the challenging emotional stuff, my family did not talk about it. So I remember it took me a while to even be able to identify my feelings and know that there's a difference between sadness and grief. Both of them, water comes out of our eyes, but there's a difference between sadness and grief. I had to learn how to have my anger in a responsible way, because as humans, we have a whole spectrum of emotions. So I had to learn how to, and I had to learn how to grieve. I never really experienced grief until I was, I think, easily in my 40s. I had never really had, profound lost people that I was close to. And my grief started with pets. I'll never forget the first dog that Jackie and I had, that we only had about 6 months. And when we had to put her down, I mean, I couldn't even stay at the vet. Jackie stayed at the vet. And I had never experienced grief. And it was the experience of my heart breaking open. I know Aja brought up grief before, and I know there are people here in this community that are experiencing grief now of all different kinds. So I had felt that my heart broke open. And what I learned from that is, to really also feel that the love that was in there, that was behind there, and when Jackie died, I felt I had a phrase that said, let the depth of our grief be a testimony to the depth of our love. It's natural that we grieve. So any of the more challenging feelings, grief and sadness and anger and, all the more difficult ones, we need to learn to express, because it's healthy, and being able to, and it can be a form of pain, and not pain that we want to, stay caught in a loop with, but be able to beautifully and loving and humbly and vulnerably express. So, the first, what I call building block of relationship, is what I call self-awareness. We need to be aware of ourselves, again, the emotional intelligence, have our feelings, feel our feelings, be able to label the feeling, oh, this is grief or whatever it is, and then be able to communicate, be able to articulate that, because connection requires what we call intimacy, or into me I see, or into you I see, or into us see. I think I coined a new phrase. Really, and the only real way to know another, to feel another, to be connected, to experience another, is if they reveal themselves. So, and obviously, and we all know that's not always easy, and we don't always have to. We're not saying you have to go around being, completely transparent all the time. You don't. It's a choice whether we share ourselves or open ourselves. And there are places where I don't feel emotionally safe with people. So it's purposeful for me, and it's a tool for me to not share some of my vulnerable feelings with everyone, because vulnerability is one of the primary building blocks also of what I call a sacred relationship. Now, vulnerability, because there's space between me and you, me and the other. There's space between us, and we, now I also believe that primarily in the American culture and many other cultures, we have been taught what I call a defensive style of relating. We, our relating becomes forms of protection and defense, and also trying to get what we want. But it becomes a form of manipulation, as opposed to what I call vulnerability and making requests, because people don't certainly have to relate to us. They don't have to give us what we want. Nobody's obligated. Another building block of relationship is what we call making requests, letting people know what we want. And that is certainly challenging and vulnerable, because people get to say no. Imagine that. Let's take a breath. A lot of us have trouble. I'm a recovering codependent. Early on, I didn't know how to say no. I was in relationship with a spiritual teacher for 16 years. I didn't know how to say no to. It wasn't allowed. He was also, a little bit of a rageaholic. So he wasn't a safe person, really, in a lot of ways to be around. But I remember, the day that I took what I call my dignity back, that I first started saying no and standing up for myself. It was a very, very important step in my relationship with myself. So a relationship becomes somewhat of a game of, requests and negotiation, but it also creates agreement, because when we come together in agreement, whether we're making agreements to actually do activities, but it's not just activities or what we give each other in various ways on the outside. A lot of it, especially for many of us who are still in various kinds of trauma recovery from our childhood, and for the most part, at some level, who isn't, that, really reclaiming our self-love, our self-worth, our self-esteem, our ability to be loved. I have a cartoon here that I just saw on Facebook, I think yesterday, the day before, and looks like it's kind of a little person, but it could be an adult too. and there's a genie there. And the little person or the person says to the genie, I wish I was worthy of love. And the genie says, poof, it is done. And the person says, wait a minute, nothing's changed. And the genie says, correct. Because one of my teachers used to say, you can't become worthy because you were never unworthy. So again, one of the tools of sacred relationship is continuing to do our own healing and reclaiming, again, our self-love, our self-worth. And it's a practice. It doesn't mean we get perfect. Okay, now I have decided I'm lovable and I'm worthy, and now I'm going to go out there and meet my perfect person. To me, I think recovering the sacredness of our humanity, healing our hearts, coming home to the preciousness of our hearts is, for me, going to be a lifelong process. And so one of the criteria of relationship for me is I need people who are also what I call working on themselves and, working on their emotional intelligence and working on, then how do I, practicing my self-awareness and you practicing your self-awareness, come together. And so for me, it's not about being perfect in any sense of the word. As a matter of fact, because that's never going to actually happen. It's about coming together with someone who's also practicing, someone who's willing. Scott Katamas from Love Coach Academy taught me that in relationship, people have to be both capable and willing. Some people are not capable, but they're willing. Some people are not willing, but they're capable. And it doesn't mean not ultimately capable. I think, again, sacred relationship is what I call the new frontier, for humanity. We are literally, as humans, we are literally still evolving. I mean, it looks like, we're not apes anymore, but we are literally still evolving. Our DNA is evolving. Our relational capacities are evolving. Our ability to live harmoniously on the planet with planet Earth is evolving. I mean, all of this is still certainly a work in progress, as I believe each of us is. So, coming together with another, like I said, one of the first things is someone who's also working on themselves, and someone, we're going to practice and we're going to step on each other's toes. We're going to make mistakes. I've been in a relationship where I've felt hurt. People who I know love me, but and also or felt disappointed. But one of the primary tools is to practice that other people don't create our experience. I practice something I call the bubble technique. That in my bubble, I am creating my experience. Now, I'm not saying I'm not influenced or stimulated. When someone says something and then I feel hurt, I generated that hurt, or I generated my disappointment. Now, it doesn't mean I can't communicate to them and let them know, because a lot of times, we're so self-consumed that we are often so unaware, of another's experience. And then, so sacred relationship is where two people really practice. And like I said, I do this, I coach couples. So to coach couples to come together and slow down and take the time. I mean, I have been working with a couple who just making time to sit with each other has been at times a big challenge in their life. But as they, when they do that, if it's, 10 minutes a day or a half an hour on a Friday night or whatever it is, to just what I call get current and get present, and not just talk about stuff, not just how was your day, but like really what's happening. And then see, how we're affecting each other. Are we even, participating with each other? A relationship requires participation, so, it's like nurturing a plant or nurturing, some other living being in our life. Our relationship is a living entity. So taking that time to get present with each other and communicate and tell the truth. I mean, the real truth, the truth as we know it, what I call our personal truth, which changes. So to be able to communicate our personal truth with each other and then really listen. And it's challenging because, listening skills is also another whole level, the listening skills, because, there's a phrase that says the Creator gave you one mouth and two ears. Use them proportionately. So listening skills are very important. because we, without realizing it too, we already have filters in the way that we listen. I brought up before that most of us are still in recovery of, childhood traumas and stuff. And most of us have at least one, if not a handful or so, of what I call wounds or primary wounds. And these wounds are beliefs that we, kind of imprinted into our nervous system and our mind, often without realizing it. When we had forms of what we call threat and trauma, usually in childhood, where either abuse, something was happening to us that was not good for us, is what we call abuse, or neglect, which is that we felt like we didn't have access to the things we needed in life, which is certainly not just, food, shelter, and clothing, but it's time and attention with, parents or loved ones. We needed appreciation. We needed to be heard from. We needed stimulation. There's lots of different qualities of being that help us, be healthy as a human being. But when we either had forms of abuse or forms of neglect, that was what we call an overwhelming experience to our system, our body mind system. When we're then, we a lot of times arrive in a what we call a helpless experience of helplessness, and it's emotionally painful. And it's in those emotionally painful experiences and our inability to correct, or get what we need in the relational aspect, that the mind comes in and tries to do what the mind does, which is create meanings. Now, the mind is the non-feeling part of our system. But so when we have an emotional overwhelming experience, the mind comes in to try to help, but the mind is not the feeling part of our system. It's the thinking, it's the meaning making machine part of our system. So it makes up a meaning about why this pain is happening, because it's the last resort. It's one of the last resorts we have in terms of trying to manage this experience on our own, which is part of the problem, because what we really needed, again, was a relational dynamic. But the mind comes in and makes up meanings like, well, it must be my fault, or it's because I'm not lovable, or I'm not good enough, or those kinds of beliefs. And those become what we call our primary wounds. And, unfortunately, unless we've been working on ourselves, and these beliefs, as some of you have heard me speak, I use a tool I call the menu of life. My good enough belief and my I'm not good enough belief are going to always be on the menu. Which one I think about more and which one I run through my system on a regular basis matters. But just because I've done a lot of work on myself and I feel a lot more good enough than I used to, doesn't mean that feeling not good enough won't ever come up. So just because I am, more healthy or have, more sense of self-esteem or feel lovable or valuable, doesn't mean that I don't ever feel vulnerable to, being able to feel worthy of what I want, or allow another to be close to me and feel like that's going to go okay. So even in relationships that are powerful and even long lasting, that these wounds can get challenged. So, to have a friend or a partner or a lover or a spouse or a teacher or a friend or whoever, that we can have these understandings with, that these places in us will get touched, and that's okay. And we can, when necessary, we can voice that. I have a good friend, some of you may know, I identify as a compulsive eater. I can see that, eating issues have been part of my family life, probably ever since I was small, and I started having a weight issue since I was 12. And especially now with COVID, I put on some weight last year, and I'm really not happy about it. I'm really not comfortable in my body that way. So I'm really working on it, and I'm starting to make progress. I guess it's been about a month or so that I started saying, look, if I don't really do something, this isn't going to change. And I have very slowly, small steps, being conscious of at each meal and every day, just small things, making small changes. And I have a good friend that I typically spend Sunday afternoons with. I'll be going over later today. She's one of my COVID pod. We've been hanging out since last April. And she also has some similar issues. So she's been a confidant that I've been able to talk to about this. And the other thing was last week, 2 weeks ago, I came away feeling, or that week I was able to notice that I felt really nurtured inside, and I felt like safe. And I realized that I was experiencing with her kind of a form of mothering. I don't know if it's real mothering, actual mothering. It wouldn't have to be mothering. Just to feel, emotionally good, safe or nurtured doesn't have to be a form of mothering. But I related it that way a little bit. She is a mother, and and I also have a real wonderful mother in real life. But I just came away feeling there was something in me that deeply got touched because we were able to share really honestly about some of the places, we have trouble with our eating, and we're both working on it. And she's made amazing progress, lost like 30 pounds and stuff. And, she's in her 70s. It's not as easy sometimes as you're older and the metabolism slows down. But it was really wonderful to feel like a deep part of me got touched and got served, where I was able to share honestly about, a place I have difficulty in my life, and feel safe and feel cared about, but also that I wasn't alone in the process. So that was really important for me. So again, a lot of these places where we struggle, and again, because a lot of us are, feel what I call the push-pull of relationship. On the one hand, we want someone, at least one person, to be really close with, and especially if you want that, to be able to have the physical closeness or the sensual or the sexual closeness. But on the other hand, we're not meant to be glommed onto each other, all the time. We are separate individuals. We have jobs, we have feelings, we have lives. So a lot of times people get caught in what I call the push-pull or the come close, go away aspects of a relationship, and often don't know how to speak to that. I know I certainly have not at times known how to speak to that. So a lot of times we either sacrifice the closeness for our autonomy or sacrifice our autonomy for the closeness. And what we really need is, as much as possible, a balance. I teach in my classes that we need connection. We also need solitude, and everybody gets to decide for themselves or experiment and discover over time, what is your ratio in terms of needing solitude and connection, and you get to decide that, and then, negotiate that with friends or partners or whoever. So there's a lot. Again, I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of this talk today. I had actually made some notes. I have like 3 pages here that we're not even going to get to. But, just touching on the main message here is to take a breath and be gentle with yourselves. Perhaps even put your hand on your heart or your hands on your heart and remind yourself you are a precious, divine, worthy child of the universe, and we deserve to have love and to give love and feel value and give value. So many of us have experienced heartbreak in life of all kinds, and a lot of times it's because we've experienced this heartbreak. And here again, the emotional intelligence, many of us, we were not honestly taught how to grieve, because we have lost lovers, we have lost dreams, we have lost pets, we have lost people, we have lost things in life. And heartbreak is, the loss of what we call a love. A loss of a relationship is, I'm sure many of us can relate, one of the deepest things and hardest things we will ever experience. Of course, I've experienced that myself, either through like Jackie's actual death or really good friends choosing to leave my life. I mean, many of the pets, all kinds of things. But the truth is that while heartbreak and loss hurts a lot, we can manage loss. The associated emotion with loss is grief, and we can grieve better, and we don't have to grieve by ourselves. It's important that's why we have memorial services and communities, and again, maybe not as much here with COVID, but we can manage loss. And the more we start what I call coming out about the truth of our pains, the loss, the grief, and even the desires and the wanting to come close with somebody, that kind of thing, we can all keep learning and getting better at what I call managing our heart, and honoring the passions of our heart, but also honoring the pains of our heart. So I hope that this talk has had some value for you. And it's been an honor to be able to offer some of this today. And again, I hope it has had some value. So with that, I think I will close. So thank you for listening to me today. Blessings. And do your best to keep your heart open. The good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. Okay.